Imagine the world's most powerful leaders frozen in silence as one man turns his back and walks away. That's exactly what happened at the United Nations General Assembly, when President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso delivered the ultimate lesson in dignity to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. After days of tension over an ultimatum and a perceived insult to Africa, Netanyahu extended a hand for a symbolic handshake. But Traoré didn't flinch. He stood, stared, and simply walked out, leaving Netanyahu humiliated on the global stage. This wasn't just a diplomatic snub, it sparked a worldwide movement with 38 million views on the clip alone, trending hashtags, street protests, and murals celebrating African self-respect. It's a story of power, composure, and the end of patronizing politics. But the truth behind this moment is even more explosive than you think. To truly understand the gravity of that walkout at the United Nations, we need to rewind and set the stage. It all started about 72 hours before the General Assembly showdown. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a nation known for its resilient spirit and growing influence in African politics, had issued a stark ultimatum. This wasn't out of nowhere. It stemmed from comments made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a recent press conference. Netanyahu, in what many perceived as a dismissive tone, questioned the intelligence and leadership capabilities of African nations, specifically referencing Burkina Faso, in a way that felt like a direct insult to its people and the broader continent. The remarks sparked immediate outrage across Africa. Social media exploded with calls for accountability. Leaders from Kenya to Nigeria condemned the statements as patronizing and rooted in outdated colonial attitudes. Traoré, a former diplomat turned president, didn't waste time. He demanded a public apology from Netanyahu within 72 hours, threatening to sever diplomatic ties between Burkina Faso and Israel if ignored. This wasn't just talk, it carried weight, because Burkina Faso represents a key voice in the African Union, and such a move could inspire a domino effect across the continent. As the deadline approached, the world watched. Netanyahu's team downplayed it as a misunderstanding, but no apology came. Whispers in diplomatic circles suggested Israel viewed the ultimatum as bluff, underestimating Traoré's resolve. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, citizens rallied in support, with hashtags like #AfricaDemands, gaining traction. The tension built like a storm, culminating in that fateful UN session. Netanyahu arrived looking weary, flanked by aides, as cameras captured every nuance. The chamber buzzed with anticipation in multiple languages. Traoré sat composed, representing not just his country, but the collective dignity of Africa. When Netanyahu took the podium, he offered vague platitudes about shared values and cooperation, extending a hand in a gesture meant to symbolize reconciliation. But Traoré's response, or lack thereof, changed everything. This setup wasn't merely political theater, it highlighted decades of uneven power dynamics in global diplomacy. African leaders have long been sidelined or patronized, their voices softened or erased. Traoré's ultimatum flipped the script, demanding respect on equal terms. And as we'll see, the fallout went far beyond the UN walls. But this is just the beginning of how one man's composure ignited a global firestorm. Now that we've set the context, let's dive into the heart of what unfolded in that United Nations chamber. This is where the real drama peaked, and it's a moment that exposed the raw underbelly of international power plays. Benjamin Netanyahu approached the podium with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and began his address. "President Traoré, and to the great people of Burkina Faso," he said, his voice steady, but laced with caution. "If there was any misunderstanding, any perception of insult, it was never my intention." Right there you could sense the dodge. No direct apology, no ownership of the words that had ignited this firestorm. Instead, he pivoted to vague assurances, talking about shared values between Israel and Africa, the importance of regional cooperation, and the need for dialogue in turbulent times. For nearly 4 minutes, he wove through platitudes, painting a picture of unity without addressing the elephant in the room. Africa's rightful outrage over his earlier mocking of Burkina Faso's leadership, and by extension, the continent's dignity. Delegates shifted in their seats. Whispers rippled through the hall in English, French, Arabic, and more. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Netanyahu, perhaps sensing the room's skepticism, decided to escalate with a gesture that had worked in past diplomatic tight spots. He extended his hand toward the section where President Traoré sat, offering a symbolic handshake across the chamber. It was meant to be a bridge, a visual olive branch signaling reconciliation. For a split second, the room held its breath, waiting for Traoré's response. But Traoré didn't play along. He rose slowly from his seat, his posture impeccable, his face a mask of calm resolve. He locked eyes with Netanyahu, holding the gaze just long enough to make the point crystal clear. Then, without a word, without a hint of drama or hesitation, he turned his back and walked out. Flanked by his security team, he moved with deliberate steps, head high, eyes forward. The chamber froze. Netanyahu's hand hung in the air, suspended in rejection. Cameras snapped furiously. Some delegates gasped audibly. Others stared in stunned silence. It was the most humbling image of Netanyahu's long political career, a still frame destined to become iconic. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed Traoré. Microphones thrust forward, questions flying. Why didn't you respond? Why walk away? Traoré paused, looked directly into the lenses, and delivered a line that would echo around the world. Africa does not shake hands with disrespect. That was it. No elaboration, no rant, just a simple, unfiltered truth. And in that brevity lay its power. The clip of the walkout exploded online almost instantly. Within hours, it racked up over 38 million views across social media platforms. Hashtags like #Traoré walks away trended in more than 20 countries from South Africa to the United States. Commentators hailed it as the boldest act of modern diplomacy, a masterclass in composure under pressure. But remember that 38 million view count. I'll come back to why it's more than just a number in a bit, because it ties into something even bigger about global shifts in power. This revelation wasn't confined to digital spaces. On-the-ground reactions poured in like a tidal wave. In Kenya University, students flooded the streets chanting, "Respect is earned, not begged." Their voices carried a rhythm of unity, drums beating in sync with placards demanding accountability from world leaders. In Nigeria, activists unveiled massive murals depicting Traoré striding away from a crumbling wall, with Netanyahu's image fracturing behind him, a visual metaphor for shattered arrogance. Even in Paris, thousands from the African diaspora gathered outside the Israeli embassy for a silent vigil, standing motionless for exactly 72 minutes to honor the ignored ultimatum. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern of spontaneous solidarity. For years, African voices had been marginalized in global forums, their concerns dismissed as secondary. Netanyahu's initial insult, publicly questioning the intelligence and dignity of Burkina Faso's leadership, tapped into that deep-seated frustration. Traoré's walkout became a spark igniting a fire that spread because it resonated on a personal level. It wasn't about politics alone. It was about reclaiming narrative control. Western media outlets scrambled to frame the event. Headlines popped up like, "Diplomatic misunderstanding at UN," or "Missed opportunity for dialogue," attempting to soften the blow and portray it as a minor hiccup. But the public saw through the spin. Social media users dissected the coverage, pointing out biases and calling for honest reporting. A retired EU ambassador with 40 years in the field went on record saying, "I've never seen such composure. It was devastatingly effective." That quote alone amplified the moment's legitimacy. Netanyahu, meanwhile, retreated into silence. No follow-up statement, no press conference, just a void that only deepened the crisis. What could he say? The world had witnessed the failure firsthand. The image of his outstretched hand unmet symbolized a broader reckoning. This core moment revealed not just a personal humiliation, but a seismic shift in diplomatic norms. Africa, through Traoré, showed that respect isn't optional, it's foundational. And as reactions continued to build, it became clear this was no fleeting scandal. But the story doesn't end with the walkout. The deeper implications for global relations are about to unfold. Remember that 38 million view count I mentioned earlier. Here's why it matters more than just viral metrics. It's a barometer for a profound shift in global perceptions of power and respect. In this deep dive, we'll unpack the layers of what Traoré's walkout really means for stakeholders across the board, from diplomatic circles to everyday citizens. This wasn't an isolated snub. It was a calculated strike at the heart of entrenched inequalities in international relations. First, let's examine the impact on Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel. For a leader known for his defiant rhetoric and strategic maneuvering, this moment was a public relations nightmare. Netanyahu's silence post-walkout speaks volumes. By not issuing a follow-up apology or clarification, he's allowed the narrative to fester, potentially eroding Israel's diplomatic standing in Africa. The continent is home to over 1.4 billion people with growing economic clout through initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area. Severing ties, even symbolically, could mean lost opportunities in trade security partnerships and votes in international forums like the UN. Israeli aides, looking aged and harried in the chamber, likely anticipated backlash, but not this level of global amplification. Commentators suggest Netanyahu's minimization tactic, framing it as a misunderstanding, backfired because it came across as arrogant, reinforcing the very insult that sparked the crisis. In Israeli domestic politics, this could fuel opposition critiques, painting him as out of touch with evolving global dynamics where emerging powers demand equity. Now shift to President Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso. Traoré emerges as a hero, not through aggression, but through unyielding poise. His background as a former diplomat equipped him to navigate this with precision. By walking away, he elevated Burkina Faso's profile overnight, positioning it as a beacon for African sovereignty. The ultimatum wasn't impulsive, it was rooted in a history of African nations being undervalued. Stakeholders in Burkina Faso, from government officials to citizens, now see tangible pride restoration. Economically, this could attract investments from Pan-African allies, strengthening ties within the African Union. But here's a curiosity gap. What if this inspires other African leaders to adopt similar stances? We'll circle back to that potential chain reaction shortly. Broader stakeholder analysis reveals ripples in Western establishments. The EU ambassador's praise underscores how Traoré's composure devastated traditional diplomacy, where gestures like handshakes often mask power imbalances. Western media's spin, labeling it a missed opportunity, highlights bias prioritizing dialogue over accountability. This has irked audiences in the global South who view it as evidence of double standards. For the United States, a key Israeli ally, this complicates Middle East-Africa relations, especially amid ongoing conflicts where African votes matter in UN resolutions. African stakeholders, particularly youth, are the real winners here. The document paints vivid scenes: Kenyan students chanting Nigerian murals, Parisian diaspora's silent protest. These acts aren't just reactions, they're empowerment tools. For generations patronized Traoré's action provides a blueprint grace under fire Trump's confrontation. It fosters a sense of continental unity, potentially boosting activism on issues like climate justice or debt relief. Social media's role amplifies this. Those 38 million views aren't passive. They're engagements fueling algorithms to push the story further, creating a feedback loop of awareness. If you think this is shocking, wait until you hear about the long-term diplomatic fallout. Even experts are calling this a turning point. A retired diplomat noted its devastating effectiveness, implying it could redefine negotiation tactics. For multilateral bodies like the UN, this exposes flaws in protocols that favor established powers. Delegates' gasps in the chamber signal a collective realization silence can be louder than speeches. Zooming out, the analysis ties into psychological impacts. Netanyahu's suspended hand symbolizes vulnerability, a stark contrast to his usual bravado. Traore's quote, "Africa does not shake hands with disrespect," lands like a mic drop, resonating because it's authentic and unapologetic. This terrifies establishments accustomed to dictating terms as it democratizes diplomacy via social media. In essence, this event dissects power structures. Israel's perceived dominance challenged Africa's agency asserted, and global audiences awakened. The stakeholders, from leaders to youth, now navigate a landscape where dignity precedes deals. But keep that chain reaction in mind. It's crucial because it hints at escalating tensions ahead. And this is where things start to connect to a much larger historical tapestry, one that stretches back decades and reveals patterns of disrespect toward African nations on the world stage. To fully grasp the significance of President Traoré's walkout, we must place it within the broader context of international relations, drawing parallels to past events and exploring its implications across regions. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a culmination of frustrations that have simmered for generations, now boiling over in a way that could reshape global alliances. Historically, African leaders have faced similar patronizing attitudes from Western and Middle Eastern powers. Think back to the 1960s during the wave of decolonization. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana or Julius Nyerere of Tanzania were often dismissed as naive or unstable by superpowers, their calls for sovereignty mocked in private cables and public forums. Fast forward to the 1980s, when Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was caricatured in Western media for his Pan-African visions, reducing complex diplomacy to eccentricity. More recently, in 2011, during the Arab Spring, African Union efforts to mediate in Libya were sidelined by NATO interventions, reinforcing the notion that African input was secondary. Netanyahu's insult to Burkina Faso echoes these moments, questioning intelligence and dignity in a way that harks back to colonial-era tropes of inferiority. But Traoré's response flips the script, drawing inspiration from figures like Nelson Mandela, who used quiet strength to dismantle apartheid without descending to his oppressor's level. Mandela's walk to freedom in 1990 symbolized dignity. Traoré's walkout does the same for diplomacy. This parallel isn't coincidental. It taps into a renaissance of African agency seen in movements like End SARS in Nigeria, or the African Union's push for vaccine equity during COVID-19. The walkout becomes a modern emblem signaling that Africa won't tolerate erasure anymore. Regionally, the implications are profound. In Africa, this event could galvanize unity. The African Union might convene special sessions to discuss standardized responses to external insults, potentially leading to bloc-wide policies on diplomatic ties. Countries like South Africa, with its history of anti-apartheid solidarity, could lead calls for investigations into similar slights. Economically, nations might accelerate intracontinental trade, reducing reliance on partners like Israel, which has invested in African tech and agriculture. But this will make you angry when you consider the human cost for everyday Africans. It's validation that their leaders can stand tall, boosting national pride amid challenges like poverty and climate change. Shifting to the Middle East, Israel's position grows precarious. Netanyahu's government, already navigating tensions with Palestinians and neighbors, now faces African backlash at a time when the continent's votes are crucial in UN resolutions on Gaza or settlements. African nations have historically supported Palestinian causes. This could intensify boycotts or divestments. For instance, if Burkina Faso severs ties, others like Ethiopia or Rwanda, key Israeli allies in security tech, might reconsider partnerships. The diaspora angle adds layers. African communities in Israel, often marginalized, could see this as empowerment, sparking internal debates on immigration and equality. In Europe and the Americas, reactions highlight divides. The Parisian demonstration by African youth underscores how diaspora networks amplify events, turning local protests into global pressure. Western governments caught between Israeli alliances and African economic interests might push for quiet resolutions. Yet media spin as misunderstandings risks alienating younger demographics who value authenticity. In the U.S., where African American leaders draw parallels to civil rights struggles, this could influence foreign policy debates, especially with elections looming. Globally, the broader context reveals a shifting multipolar world. Emerging powers like China and Russia, already courting Africa through infrastructure deals, could exploit this vacuum, offering respect in exchange for influence. The UN itself faces scrutiny if symbolic gestures fail. What reforms are needed for equitable representation? Traoré's composure contrasts with bombastic styles of leaders like Trump or Bolsonaro, suggesting a new diplomatic paradigm where silence wields power. This should terrify those clinging to old hierarchies, as it exposes vulnerabilities in a connected era. Social media democratizes narratives, turning a UN moment into a viral blueprint for resistance. Youth worldwide, from Asia to Latin America, are watching, inspired to demand dignity in their contexts. But what happens next in this unfolding saga will truly test the resilience of these shifts. This affects every single one of us in ways we're only beginning to understand, as the walkout at the UN isn't just a snapshot in time, it's a catalyst for potential futures that could redefine global diplomacy. Let's explore the possible scenarios ahead, from immediate consequences to long-term ripple effects, and what we should watch for as this story evolves. The stakes are high, with Africa's rising influence clashing against established powers, and the outcomes could last for decades. In the short term, picture this: Burkina Faso follows through on its ultimatum and severs diplomatic ties with Israel. President Traoré has already hinted at it, and, with public support surging, it's a plausible next step. This could trigger a chain reaction across Africa. Nations like Kenya and Nigeria, where reactions have been fervent, might impose partial sanctions or recall ambassadors. The African Union could convene an emergency summit, drafting a resolution condemning insults to member states and outlining protocols for collective responses. For Israel, this means navigating isolation in key UN votes. Africa holds 54 seats in the General Assembly, a bloc that could sway resolutions on everything from Middle East peace to climate funding. Netanyahu's government might scramble for damage control, perhaps issuing a belated apology, but the damage is done. Trust erodes quickly in diplomacy. Zooming out to medium-term horizons, say 6 months to a year, we could see economic repercussions unfold. Israel has invested heavily in African markets, think agricultural tech in Ethiopia or cybersecurity in Rwanda. If ties fray, these deals could stall, pushing African nations toward alternatives like China, which already dominates infrastructure through Belt and Road initiatives. China might capitalize, offering respectful partnerships that emphasize equality, further tilting the geopolitical balance. For the US and Europe, this complicates alliances. Supporting Israel risks alienating African partners crucial for rare earth minerals or migration policies. Youth movements inspired by Traoré's blueprint could amplify this. Imagine widespread campaigns boycotting Israeli products, echoing BDS, but with an African twist. Social media will fuel it, with Africa demands respect, evolving into calls for broader reforms. But here's where it gets really intriguing: long-term scenarios that reshape the world order. If Traoré's model succeeds, it could inspire a new era of assertive diplomacy from the global south. Latin American or Asian leaders might adopt similar tactics against perceived slights from superpowers. The UN could face pressure for structural changes like weighted voting or mandatory cultural sensitivity training for delegates. On the flip side, if Netanyahu weathers the storm through alliances elsewhere, it might embolden dismissive attitudes, leading to more fractures. Climate talks, for instance, could suffer if African nations withdraw cooperation in protest. Economically, a united Africa might accelerate the continental free trade area, creating a powerhouse bloc less dependent on external validation. What terrifies experts is the wild card of social media and youth empowerment. Those 38 million views. They represent a generation that's digitally native and globally connected. Future scenarios include viral diplomacy becoming the norm, leaders using platforms to bypass traditional channels, turning public opinion into policy levers. Traoré's walkout could become a case study in international relations courses teaching that composure trumps confrontation. But risks loom. Misinformation could twist narratives, or cyber campaigns escalate tensions into real-world conflicts. Social proof backs this up. Commentators from the US to South Africa are already labeling it a turning point. A Nigerian activist group plans annual walkout days to commemorate it, while Kenyan universities incorporate it into curricula. Watch for key indicators. Netanyahu's next public statement, African Union meetings, or spikes in social media engagement. If views hit 100 million, expect mainstream adoption of the symbolism. This changes everything we thought we knew about power dynamics, but hold on, the most crucial takeaways and calls to action are still ahead. In wrapping up this extraordinary tale from the United Nations, the key takeaways are crystal clear and profoundly inspiring. President Ibrahim Traoré's silent walkout wasn't merely a rejection of Benjamin Netanyahu's gesture. It was a resounding affirmation of African dignity in the face of disrespect. We saw how a vague non-apology and a symbolic handshake crumbled against composed resolve, sparking 38 million views, global trends, street chants, murals, and silent protests. This moment exposed the cracks in traditional power dynamics, where patronizing attitudes toward Africa have lingered too long. Traoré provided a blueprint for self-respect. No shouting, no groveling, just grace that echoes louder than words. It terrified establishments, challenged media spins, and empowered youth worldwide to demand accountability. The broader lessons extend beyond diplomacy. This event underscores that true power lies in authenticity and unity, reminding us that continents like Africa are no longer voices to be softened or erased. Netanyahu's humiliation serves as a cautionary tale for leaders everywhere. Insults have consequences in our interconnected world. For Africa, it's a renaissance moment, fostering pride and potential for collective action. Now, it's your turn to engage. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Africa, Europe, Asia, America. Let's build this conversation and show the world that dignity matters. If this story moved you, hit that like button to stand with respect over rhetoric. Share it with friends to spread the message far and wide. And if you believe in uncovering truths the mainstream overlooks, subscribe to our channel right now. You'll get notifications for more in-depth analyses on global shifts, diplomatic dramas, and empowerment stories that reshape perspectives. Your subscription keeps this movement alive. Stay tuned in the next video. We'll dive into another untold chapter of African resilience that's shaking foundations even harder.